Welcome to Coffee Conversations. I have with me today Sean Hale. And Sean, you're with Nonprofit CFOs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what your business, the services your business offers.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here. And so I've been in the nonprofit world for 25 years now. And about 4 years ago, I wanted to do more to help more nonprofits really, well, succeed because I've seen over and over in my career how behind every successful nonprofit, you're going to find a strong back office and vice versa. And really, we focus on the back office and especially the financial management part. But just about everybody on the team also has that experience with some of the administrative stuff and some of the other things. But the area where we really get called on the most help is with services like interim financial management. And so
Mhm.
you've just had your one accountant who's been in that seat for 20 years walk out and nobody knows why, but they're burned out or something like that. And you don't know how you're going to get payroll out or get the bills paid. And
Yes.
so we do a lot of those kinds of engagements.
Awesome.
We do fractional CFO
Okay.
engagements where you have a nonprofit, maybe $1, $2, $3 million budget. You don't need a full-time CFO. But wow, 20 or 30 hours a month could make a really big difference in some of those higher level leadership, financial leadership type functions. So we'll do that. We'll do special projects. And then we also have started doing indirect cost rate agreements. And that's where
Great.
if you have a federal grant, by default, you can get a 10% reimbursement for your indirect costs, but sometimes your real indirect costs are like 20, 30, 40%. And so if you have a big federal grant, you're having to go out and fundraise a lot of extra money unless you get a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, in which case the government will actually pay the full cost of the project that they're doing with you.
Wonderful. That's a great service. I actually didn't realize that there were businesses out there providing support in applying for your indirect cost rates. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, we love it. And really it's one of those things. It's like if you do it in-house, sometimes you don't have the talent in-house, but sometimes also, even if you have the talent, your accounting team is just so stretched thin these days that that's the kind of thing that can be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so you take a really good accountant who's, had, you know, held things together for you and they just keep doing it over and over again. And sooner or later they break. And that's something that's easy to outsource and have it get done well. And it's one less stress on your team.
That is awesome. I actually think I have a client for you. So,
Cool.
now need to make that mental note really quickly. And then the fractional CFO, I'm seeing this so much more often where there are businesses or nonprofits are utilizing businesses such as yours to come in and provide consistent service so that it's not being interrupted by turnover in staff. Also, different ways that people use QuickBooks and other tracking software or financial software, and then that can change all kinds of things with the chart of accounts. So it helps provide consistency for the
Mhm.
organization too.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And that way you don't have to try and we're going to hire this finance director who also is our bookkeeper and our IT person and our HR person, all those things like that. that that gets you into trouble sooner or later in most organizations. And that person is probably wearing one of or more of those hats not really well. And most of our people, most of us kind of financial management accountant type people, we're perfectionists. And so it
Mhm.
eats us up also. It burns us out to know that we're not doing a great
Okay.
job. We feel terrible about it. And so if that person really, if they're like an awesome bookkeeper and they can pick up some other stuff here and there, then don't ask them to do this other stuff that maybe they don't enjoy, maybe they're not good at. But yeah, bring in like a fractional CFO to lead your budget process, to provide some of that high level financial leadership analysis, those other things, and let your bookkeeper be a great bookkeeper.
Yes.
I have a couple of clients who are struggling with that right now. That they have folks they got the these kind of promotions during emergency, and they did a great job of getting the organization through the emergency. But then, like, they're in these seats now with these titles that do not align with their skill set, and it's a recipe for burnout for them.
Wearing
And so we're
off.
trying to figure out how do we roll this back without it feeling like a demotion to the person, without or to other people around them that, oh, so and so they couldn't hack it, right? No, it's not that they couldn't hack it. It's that really they came in and they saved the organization's baking during this critical time. They held it together, but they just it wasn't right to ever ask them to be in that role
That's right.
long
It was
term.
unfair. Hmm.
Yeah. And that person might even be smart enough to do it, but they don't have the spare time now to learn the things that they need to do to really own that job well. So let's get them into a seat on the bus where they can be successful. And then while they're successful and their workload is reasonable in that, then you know what? Maybe they can, someday be a CFO, and we can work on that, right? They have a reasonable work-life balance now. Let's start training them on some of these skills, like how do you build and maintain a financial dashboard? How do you take ownership of the audit? How do you handle all these interactions with your grantors that are, especially the federal ones, they like have some really big
Yes.
expectations and they're not very patient. And so like navigating all that and stuff, they're sometimes your very best CFOs, they started off with, like your entry level bookkeeping stuff, but with in the right conditions, they can absolutely learn and grow. And a lot of them want to, but you just can't hit them with the fire hose all day long and expect that they're going to be able to grow as professionals.
Yeah. Well, and burnout is such a big problem in the nonprofit sector anyway, where everyone's doing the job of like 10 different people. So you really hit on something that's happening kind of across the sector and has for 20 years. I just think people are finally waking up to the fact that maybe employees are not willing to work 800 million hours a week, and it's unfair to treat them that way. I mean, to actually treat them kindly and giving them that space. Do you guys, is one of your services to help support, to do some maybe training and support for that bookkeeper for development in their professional development so that they can kind of improve and you can build capacity internally within these organizations?
Oh yeah, we can absolutely do that. In fact, that would not be unusual at all, like as a piece of like the fractional CFO engagement, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
to just work with that person and all right, how do we set them up for success? So first of all, their workload is reasonable so that they can carve out, let's call it 8 hours a month or something for professional development. And let's help them identify whether it's work like whether we're like training them directly or just like freeing up their plate so they can go and like attend this training on next level Excel skills or go to this other training so they can understand the software that they've been kind of using because they learned it by rote, but now they can dig in deeper and understand it because sometimes they're not always on QuickBooks. They're on some of these other systems that are even less intuitive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As if QuickBooks was intuitive to those of us who are not so inclined.
Yeah, it isn't. And if you're not a nuts and bolts detail kind of person, hopefully you don't put yourself through that pain of trying to do it. Because even if you're smart and you're hardworking, if you and numbers aren't friends, and by the way, 93% of American adults have some level of math anxiety. So 13 out of
Wow.
14 people are not necessarily on the best of terms with numbers.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so why would we put you through that pain?
Yes.
Or a
Yes.
board for that matter. Why would we put here's a rabbit hole for you, like you were
Okay.
talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Like, why would you put standard financial reports in front of a board of directors and expect eyes
Get
not to
that
glaze
real.
over? Right. You need to give them this information in a form that they can easily digest. Not because
Yes.
they're dumb, but because they're human. And most humans, you can't put a standard profit and loss or balance sheet in front of them and expect them to make sense out of it. Just
Yes.
like you can't speak Klingon to me or Polish or 100 other languages and like expect me to know what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, and most board members are not getting trained at the previous place where they served either. So they're coming in without really knowing how to read these statements and other things. That's a great point.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I want to get to the burnout because obviously the burnout's contributing to our big topic today. But I do want to hear about your background. You said you've been
Yeah.
doing this work for about 25 years. Talk to me a little bit
Hmm.
about kind of how did you get to this place in nonprofit CFOs?
So, yeah, the origin story. So it all
Hmm.
goes, well, technically, my first nonprofit job was for a little nonprofit daycare, well, 125 kids, nonprofit daycare that my mom ran back home in Southeast Idaho.
Okay.
TLC Daycare, for those of you who are in Pocatello. And I got to push a broom there when I was a teenager and like clean toilets and push a vacuum and stuff like that. So it was technically my first nonprofit job. But my first adult nonprofit job started in 1999, working for this small nonprofit on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, where I still live, working for a charismatic former priest on this little room on the side of his garage. And I got to wear all the hats. I got to learn that the hat where I have the most joy and where I can make the biggest difference is really making sure all the nuts and bolts work, and the financial management is a big piece of that. And it also illustrated for me just how important a strong back office is. The year before I started with him, there was a big hurricane in Central America. The work was in Central America. There was a big hurricane there, and this guy on his own was able to raise $250,000 in response to the flooding, which is great.
Wow. Yeah.
The 6 months after I started full time, there were two giant earthquakes in Central America, and we were able to raise $1 million. And it's not because I'm a fundraising genius. I did almost no fundraising, but we had the infrastructure in
To
place
support
so that
funding.
the programs could happen better and the fundraising could happen better. And so that when the
Mhm.
inquiries came in and the influx of money and all that, we could handle it appropriately. And that's the difference that having a strong back office
Yeah.
can
You
have.
were
And
the
that
guys
that
doing it well. So people wanted to invest with you.
they saw, okay, yeah, there's follow through, and they sent me a thank you note and the 100 other details
Yep.
that go into just making that stuff run smoothly. And
Love that.
it's not rocket science, but it's having a good detail oriented person, somebody who takes joy in that. One of us weirdos who likes dotting the i's and crossing the t's, and that stuff happens. And then when you have that running well, the fundraising people can focus on their job, the program people can focus on their job, the executive director, they can focus on the 99 other things they're supposed to do with their day, because they know that the lights are still going to come on, people are going to get paid on time. If there is a problem with the money, they're going to know about it 3 months in advance, not 3 hours in
After.
advance, or
Or
three
after.
days afterwards. Yeah, when everybody comes in like, hey, my paycheck, where is it?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you left, opened nonprofit CFOs up when?
So yeah, I'd been my last job for somebody else. I spent 4 years as the CFO at Central Texas's nonprofit capacity building organization.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and then January 2020, I thought that'd be a great time for me to set up my own
Oh,
consulting
yeah.
practice.
So we were talking a little bit about burnout and what um, our nonprofit sector kind of does and how it sets people up really for burnout. And I'm guessing, and this is just a guess, Sean, but I'm guessing that that burnout has probably is probably the reason why I'm seeing a lot of issues within the nonprofit sector of being able to retain good talent in the financial position on the team. Have you seen that as well?
How did you know? 'Cause that's totally right, Ginny. Yeah, it's a major contributing factor. And certainly, as you say, I think burnout is endemic to the nonprofit sector. I think that our kind of accounting and financial professionals, it burnout as a factor can be even stronger, in part because we tend to be introverts. We tend to be people who
Mhm.
suffer in silence. We tend to be people who put our nose to the grindstone. And so when we finally do start saying something, very often it comes out in ways that most people can barely hear. And because they don't hear it at the same volume as some of the drama queens in the other departments of the organization, they think, oh,
Never
it's not a
hears.
big deal. Sean's just, talking in a regular voice instead of his quiet whisper. And so it's all good, right? And yeah, we'll get on that as soon as we can, right? And so the organization gets really surprised when the person in that seat actually like hits burnout, because normally we just don't give a lot of warning because we're
Mm,
not the drama queens by nature. And it feels like a drama queen, we're being drama queens even to just like bring it up. Like just to even say, well, I just can't do this anymore. I can't keep missing the holidays with my family because December and January are the busiest times of year for
yes.
a nonprofit accountant typically. And we like suck it up year after year while our friends and our families and our coworkers are off having fun and relaxing. We're buckling down and doing that. And by the time we get through that, like we got to get things spick and span because the audit season's coming right up, and it's unrelenting. On top of that, there are some circumstantial things outside of the burnout. You have an aging workforce among accountants. In 2019, 75% of all the accountants in America, 75% were at retirement age. That's an
Oops.
insanely large number. You have the pandemic did not help, right? Not just because people left the workforce because of illness, but also people started like reprioritizing things and saying, I don't want to live this way for the rest of my life. I want to have
Yeah.
work-life balance, and I'm not going to get that here. So I'm gone, right?
Right.
You also have this thing it's part of the CPA world. And granted, somebody can be a great financial staff person. They can be a great accountant without having those three letters after their name. So CPA does not all accountants are CPAs.
Right.
And but we're not making accountants as a country fast enough. And that was happening before the pandemic. And that has to do with things like high stress, low pay, and also that it to get just the accounting degree and to get those, then to take the test and take those three letters after your name, you actually have to do 5 years of college instead of four, like most of your friends. So
Okay.
wow,
Okay.
my friends are going into these higher paying jobs and they have one less year of school, one less year of debt. You have all those things. You also have a lack of diversity in the profession, especially
Okay.
among CPAs. Like 15% of CPAs are white. And so you have a lot of folks who just, when it comes time to like think about professions where they can picture themselves and like identify mentors and other folks who have shared life experience, they're not finding that.
Yes.
And
Okay.
so all these things are like these multiple competing factors that make for this mess that ultimately mean that for a nonprofit, it can be really, really hard to find an accountant when they have a vacancy.
Yeah. Wow. I'm actually, as you were talking, thinking about how much that has impacted a lot of the things you discussed, really have been in all other positions within a nonprofit. I mean, executive directors, we saw around 70% of nonprofit turnover for executive directors in the last 3 years because people are like, yeah, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm not willing to put up with this anymore. So it's interesting. I had not thought about it from the perspective of like the accounting person on the team, and how much all of this has really affected people's choice to go into that profession. That's really interesting. Do
Yeah.
you um I think so. We know there's a problem, right? And we know that the turnover is really costly to an organization, especially in the area of finance, when it's usually the only person who knows how to do that is the person that just walked out the door. Um, are we not thinking of all the costs associated? Because I'm thinking immediately of like the employment costs, the cost of, just employee work and onboarding, offboarding, all of that, the cost of not knowing what they were doing and having to bring in someone then hopefully clean it up and not losing grant money. But are we thinking of things, are we missing on things that might otherwise cost us as well?
There's certainly invisible costs, right? Like nobody in their accounting system has a line item for turnover, right? And so
Yeah.
maybe we should start doing that and figure out a way to do it because turnover can be really expensive for
Good
an
idea.
organization. It
Good
can
idea.
cost anywhere from like 50 to 100% of the annual cost, the annual salary of that position, because it's all those things that you mentioned. It's also somebody's, maybe it's somebody in-house who's picking up the slack when that person's gone, in which case that person's like on the fast track to burn out themselves. There's
Hmm.
a morale hit also for everybody who ever interacted with that person. Like, gosh, why did Pat leave? And they were seemed really unhappy. And so that can have cascading effects, and not just because their coworkers are picking up the stuff and stuff is breaking because that's not there anymore. It
That's
is
right.
the that phenomenon that you mentioned where sometimes if it's like a one accountant organization, then it gets really expensive really quickly, especially if things are not documented.
Yes,
Then all of a sudden you're scrambling because bad things happen if you miss payroll even by a day or two, right?
that's right.
And some grantors get really grumpy if you don't get them their reports on time, and like that can have really big cascading effects on an organization really quickly. um that yeah, they're hard to, like, we're not tracking them in the accounting system, but they're big. And so, yeah,
Yeah,
you,
good point.
you
Because
want to
I would
prevent
even,
it at all
yeah,
costs.
because I would even think like, a big funder seeing that position that they're used to communicating with for the exchange of a lot of information, that person's gone. That's going to put doubt into the funder's mind, even if nothing is impacted as far as reporting or reimbursement requests or anything. It just kind of plants a seed of what's happening at that organization if the very key position is turning over.
It can, and especially if there's like regular turnover in the position or things like that. Like I would hope most grantors, like if they see routine turnover, like okay, that's not such a big deal, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
every 5 or 10 years you see some change in that position, cool. But if you see it's more frequent or you saw that person went away mad, that kind of thing, you see that
that
the
gives you a
organization
seed.
struggled after that person left, that means, well, gee, what else are you what kind of ship are you running over there? Kind of thing. And so yeah, it can absolutely place seeds of doubt now, not just with funders, but also the board, right? The
Oh, yeah.
board sees, wow, oh wow, the executive director like didn't see this coming and let this happen and they weren't
Yes.
prepared for this. Like
Yes.
that's not a feather in the executive director's cap.
That's right. Yeah. And
And
how many
a
bank
lot,
accounts do we have and how do we get to them? And that's the panic, the treasurer's panic sets in.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and all that stuff. And can we make payroll? Like which bank account are we supposed
Yeah.
to pay it out of? What's the system? How much are we supposed to pay people? Who has the
Yeah.
password?
This is the kind of stuff that makes executive directors and CEOs lose sleep. I mean, that's what we're talking about that does that. So we know it's a problem. We got it's a
Yeah.
problem. So what can we do about it, Sean? Like what are the solutions?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things that some of the stuff it's outside of our controls as a nonprofit, right? Like the rules that say you have to have 150 credit hours to get the letter CPA after your name. Like that's out, it's mostly outside of our control. But making sure that you actually your kind of accounting finance function actually has adequate staffing to begin with, so that you have that
Okay.
work-life balance for folks. That's important, right? Making sure that you have that. And that is going to go hand in hand with having competitive pay and benefits for folks, which
That's
some
it.
nonprofits don't do. The pay for folks in this part of the organization, I've seen it go up 20, 25% or more over the last few years.
Mhm.
Yeah, you used to be able to get like a finance director, at least here in the Austin, Texas area, for maybe like 70, $80,000 a year. Like I'm seeing those getting posted at 100, 125,000.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's big. Making sure you have key processes documented. And that used to be a royal pain in the butt. And it's still, not like fun to do, but there's technology out there that makes that really easy and fast. And you want to have all your key processes documented. You want to make sure that everybody who is involved in those key processes, like payroll and paying the bills and sending the grant billing to the grantor and stuff like that, you want to make sure those people always take a vacation. Every year they take good, healthy vacation. That's part of it's for their work-life balance. But also, if you're not doing that, that's a massive red flag
We're
for
gonna know.
fraud.
Okay.
Uh, and that's because that's how you
That's good.
detect fraud. That's one of the most common ways that fraud gets detected in the organization is that somebody else steps in to do payroll twice a year and oh my gosh, I'm seeing 3 people here that are on payroll that are getting paid every time, but like I don't recognize these names. They don't work for the organization. All kinds of stuff
Wow.
comes to light when that person takes vacation or the mail comes in and like, oh, what's this with bright red letters on it from the IRS? Oh, payroll taxes haven't been paid for 2 years.
Mhm.
Oh, goodness
Mhm.
gracious. And the person who's been opening mail, like, looks like they might have been intercepting it for all this time. Um, what else can a nonprofit do about turnover? Making sure that your financial staff are on the right seat on the bus, because sometimes you do have people who get promoted to roles and responsibilities that are beyond their capacity,
Yes.
and that can just be a terrible situation. Making sure people have the right technology for the job.
Yeah. Okay.
There's good research on this now, quantifying just how demoralizing it is to have bad technology. It's crazy expensive on morale to have a slow moving computer or to have the software that isn't going to let you do the job efficiently. And it says something also, it sends a message to the employee that your time is not valuable. The quality of your work is not valuable. Sounds a pretty loud message.
I like that, Sean. I don't know that I've heard that about the technology. It makes perfect sense in our world now. That we are so dependent on it, and then to do our jobs even better, it's going to be we want our company investing in us. We want our nonprofit to invest in us and to show us that they support us. I
Yeah.
would love to see those statistics. If you want to share those with us after, I'd love to see those.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty stark statistics, but I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And so sometimes that, oh my gosh, it feels like splurging to buy a new $700 computer for somebody. But you know what? Very often that new computer is going to pay for itself in like 6 months or
Mhm.
less,
That's
just
great.
because they're not waiting for it to reboot all the time, or because it's moving slowly and all that other stuff. And it's death by a thousand cuts. Another thing an organization can do, and this goes hand in hand with making sure people are in the right seat on the bus, is bring in a CFO or a fractional CFO to
Okay.
help share the workload and make sure things get done well. If their sweet spot is bookkeeping, which is really like bookkeeping narrowly defined, strictly defined, it's like doing data entry.
Right.
And so a CFO is going to come in and do other things like financial leadership and take charge of the budget process and take charge
Cash
of a lot of
projection.
other things that so hopefully the executive director doesn't have to, go out and like fiddle with the banks and all kinds of
Yes.
other things.
Yeah.
Do you have a healthy organizational culture? That can make a big difference as well in being able to attract and retain good people. And the other thing, very often, especially in the small nonprofits, we see very often that the financial and accounting professionals are also responsible for things like HR and IT and things like that. And not only does that stretch them too far very often, and it can lead to unsatisfying work because they know they're not doing a good job, and we tend to be perfectionists, but also like that actually should be scary, right? You don't want an amateur running your IT in this day of ransomware and phishing attacks and other things. And so if you do nothing else, folks, get managed IT rather than expecting an in-house accidental IT person to do it. Just
Mhm.
because they might be the smartest person in the organization when it comes to computers doesn't mean that they're actually qualified to protect you from cyber threats and to manage the hardware needs and to manage the software needs and to have everybody in the organization go to them every time something goes
Yes.
crazy with the internet connection or
Hmm.
their equipment. You don't want that. It's a big distraction to that person who might still have a 50-hour a week job, even if they didn't have those interruptions.
Yeah. I mean, excellent point. I mean, I think that's so funny you put it that way because they do become the IT support for the staff and it's just interrupting, especially in a position like finance where you need to focus and you need head down, non-interruption. And that can be really impactful to that person getting their job done. Not to mention they don't want to be doing that IT stuff more than likely.
Yeah.
What should an accountant do if they're on the edge of burnout? What can they do?
Yeah,
The
it's tough.
organization's not doing anything, right? Like, what do they do?
Yeah, it is tough, and very often it you know it to I think to handle this in a way that we can generally feel good about afterwards and feel like we held our heads high, we took the high road. It might require us to get a little bit out of our comfort zone because again, we tend to be introverts, and we tend to be on the shy side, that kind of thing. But certainly, self-advocating is really big on this, raising the alarm early, and that includes like naming all the pain points. It means, if you're not sure whether or not you like are good at being a self-advocate, like check in with family and friends and like ask them, am I a drama queen? Am I getting the volume right when I am feeling pain, or do I need to crank up the volume on them? Every so often there are definitely there are exceptions to the rule, but the general thing is that I find that most of my peers, we need to turn up the volume to be heard when
Okay.
it's important like this. That means, of course, believing in yourself, believing in the mission, believing that you deserve work-life balance, and that the mission requires that also. Because if you don't have work-life balance, then you're not going to be able to actually help out the mission long term. And even though
Sure.
there are people in the world whose life is more difficult than yours, you're going to be able to do your very best work and bring your very best self and the most productive self to work if you actually have a reasonable level of work-life balance.
Absolutely.
Then,
I mean, you're going to start making mistakes if you're not. I mean, if there's And
Yeah.
especially in that kind of detail oriented work, you're going to start making mistakes.
And maybe
You're
you're
gonna,
not going to be the friendliest person to be around.
yeah.
And
Good.
if you have to interact with your coworkers and with clients and other things, like you want to bring your smiley face, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Other things you can do, identify solutions, because very often your boss, half the time, they don't have any idea what your job is. And they may not have, even if they have the best of intentions, they have resources, but they may not know what it is that you need. And so come to them
That's
with,
fair.
here's
Yeah.
what you can do, right? Like, I'm going to need to actually take the holidays off, and we're going to need to bring in a part-time administrative help, bring in some concrete things that are going to make a difference. Next, craft your message. We tend to craft these really long, elaborate messages and like have like a 50-page, if not a 100-page document with lots of citations and footnotes and stuff like that. But more often than not, our leader, especially if it's the executive director, like we have to boil it down to 3 minutes. We need to give it short, sweet, to the point, some bullet points, one-page summary. If you just can't help but give them that 50-page report, you need to give them a one-page executive summary, no longer than one page, 12-point font, no smaller. But tell it to them in 3 minutes. You need to get it out, all the top level stuff in 3 minutes, and then let them ask questions, because most executive directors are going to be extroverts, and that's more likely to be tuned into their way of learning. Is give them the high level, I'm hurting, about to burn out. Bad things will happen if I burn out. I got 3 solutions for you. Where do you want, what part of this do you want to talk about, right? And then the last thing would be pay attention to your employer's next step. Some of them are going to actually be able to move fast enough and make good sense. But if that, even if they're doing the right thing and they're bringing resources to it, sometimes that may not even be fast enough. In which case, know yourself. And if the things aren't going to align, far better for you to give 2 months notice or a month's notice to your employer than 2 weeks or 2 days or 2 hours notice to your employer. So if it isn't going to come together, the more notice that you can give, the better it's going to be for the organization in terms of having a smooth transition. It's
Great.
going to be expensive and just hard for the mission that we know that you've spent so many years putting your blood, sweat, and tears into making that mission happen. And so the earlier that you can just say, you know what, I'm out. I can be here through December and I can consult back for 5 hours a week after that or something like that. Whatever it is, but better to, if you're going to tap out early.
Yeah, and then you can see the end zone, so you know it's coming, and you feel like I can get to that goal post. The key
Mhm.
is having someone actually hear you. If they're in burnout, to hear that is the hardest part.
Yeah.
I train a lot on employee burnout and nurturing safe space within, and by the time an employee gets to that point, it's very difficult to have them be rational about what's happening, and to make good professional decisions, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be very, very hard. And
Yeah.
so,
Well,
yeah.
so it happens, right? So we have people leave. That it's inevitable. Sometimes the employer screws up. We all make mistakes. Sometimes the employee screws up and then they make mistakes. But whatever it may be, you end up with a vacancy. So, what should a nonprofit executive director or nonprofit CEO be looking for if they're going to hire? I'm the executive
Mhm.
director. I'm sitting a seat tomorrow. I've got a vacancy in the most precious position in my small organization, as far as I'm concerned. I can't sleep. What am I
Mhm.
going to look for in that next? Uh, and I would say this. Let's assume I know what the organization's capacity, like I know that we need more capacity. I know. So I'm looking for that high level. I'm looking for that
Mhm.
person that's really going to suit the bill. What do we look for?
I would say, first of all, make sure that you're not looking for a unicorn, because that is the default setting in so many
Good. Good.
organizations and their job descriptions, right? And so you look at the job description, it's like, oh my goodness, like you're requiring all this stuff, right? Really, they need to have like 20 years of nonprofit experience and be a CPA and graduated from an Ivy League college and this, that, and the other. And wow, you just threw in the whole kitchen sink there. Like, no. And, and
And
you,
then you want to pay them $40,000?
yeah, yeah, and give them a week's vacation every year.
Right, right.
Um, and just no, you need to more 9 times out of 10 that you're going to do so much better getting the right match for the job by actually level setting your
Okay.
expectations, throwing out the kitchen sink kind of unicorn approach where we're going to find this person who just does all this stuff and they're going to do our IT and they're going to do our HR and they're going to fulfill us in every single way. Like, no.
Right, right.
Um, so get that level set. If necessary, bring in, like, very often the executive director does not have much finance or accounting expertise. And so bring in a third party who can help you kick the tires on the hard skills. And then you as executive director, what you can bring to the table is the measure of soft skills, because very often that is a strong suit for the executive director. And if you're looking at candidates and you have several strong contenders, I would say it's a whole lot easier to train somebody on hard skills than it is on soft skills. Now, if they're a grumpy curmudgeon, chances are there's no amount of training that's going to fix that. But somebody who's checking 8 out of 10 of the boxes on the hard
Yeah,
skills,
I agree.
and like they play well with others and they are detail oriented and they seem to be like a quick learner, like, shoot, that could be a whole lot better than somebody checks 10 of the boxes, even if it was on your unicorn list of hard skills boxes, right? Even if they check all those, but they, like, people don't like them and they are really rigid and all those things that, we've learned to really dislike in people in the back office.
Yeah, I think that is such a good point, and I really love the recommendation to use an outside resource, someone who knows what to look for, someone who knows the lingo, who actually can ask these questions and really hone in if the individual knows what they're talking about or is just, run it through Chat GPT. So that I love that. I think that's such a thought. And there's so many people volunteer with organizations that be willing to assist. And I'm sure your firm does things like that as well, where you can come in and help with an organization going through some sort of search. Is that something that you can advise on?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. In fact, yeah, like, especially when we get called in on a lot of these, where the person quits with like 2 weeks or 2 hours notice kind of thing.
Mhm.
But we do not want to be like helping that organization out in emergency mode long time. We can make a lot of money that way, but really we want to see that organization get fully staffed as quickly as possible. That might mean that we may have a long-term like fractional CFO arrangement with them, but absolutely, we've helped out with lots of searches and bringing these skills into to play, and sometimes even like taking that if they don't have like a strong HR function in the organization, filtering all of those first round and second round things so that the executive director or whoever the accidental HR person is can take care of the rest of their job and not have that be the straw that broke that camel's back.
Right. We should cover accidental HR positions next time on coffee conversations because no one's doing that at any of the places.
Mm.
Um, well, Sean, this has been such a pleasure. I would love to hear. Do you have any upcoming events, any trainings, anything coming up that you want to share with our listeners?
Oh, thank you for asking. If this goes out this week,
It
I got
will.
a training on Thursday.
Okay.
So that's May 23rd at 3 or 3:30. So this is on the hot topic, probably the hottest topic in the last few years for nonprofits related to the administration, and that is the new exempt employee rules and the
Okay.
new independent contractor rules. And so it's
Great.
going to be a free webinar. And actually, we set up two of them, but the one on Wednesday, it's already full. So we set up another one on Thursday. So just go to my
Great.
website, nonprofitcfos.com. We just spun up that second one, and as of right now, there's still plenty of room. We'd love to have you. It's going to be free. And yeah.
That's great. I appreciate that. Oh, that needs to be covered a lot considering how many non or nonprofits are using contractors as in place of employees and just calling them contractors. I'm like, you
Yeah.
can't do that.
Or they
You put
got
a
these people that
lawyer hat
they're
on.
Yeah, or they have people that they've been paying $36,000 a year and they've been calling them salaried exempt. And the rules on July 1st change. So that's going to
Yes.
be like, it's going up, I think,
It,
25,
yeah,
30% on July
a
1st. And
lot.
then it's going up again January 1st. So it's going to be 65,000 by January 1st, something in that neighborhood. And a lot of organizations are going, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? We got all these
You're gonna
people and
you're gonna actually like let them work a regular job hours and take care of themselves or increase their pay. So
Yeah, there
there
are
you go.
good solutions out there, but
There
yeah,
are.
it's going to be
Yeah. Well,
some changing of gears for folks.
some big ones, and I think that they should be prepared, and that all of course affects the financials because every single one of those, even those decisions or solutions that we just discussed, are going to affect the bottom line, and certainly are
Yeah,
something they need to be thinking about. Well, I appreciate, Sean, you coming here today. I appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge, and I hope we have the opportunity to work together on some projects. That would be a lot of fun.
it sure would.
In the meantime, keep up the good work.
Well, Jenny, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for letting me talk to your audience and for everything that you're doing to help organizations through these really tough transitions. They need a lot of them that need the help like what you're doing. So thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.